Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you all are doing well. Today we'll take a look at one of my new favorite backend framework called FastAPI. FastAPI lets you create beautiful APIs with very little code, and it automatically generates amazing documentation that your end users can use to discover your API. To give you an example of the documentation that it creates, this is going to be the API that we're going to write, and all the documentation you see here were automatically generated by FastAPI. So if we take a look at the get endpoint over here called employees, you can see that the endpoint accepts a path parameter and then a bunch of query parameter. And in this documentation, it shows you what it needs and what are the different types that your user would need to pass into. When it comes to the response, you can see that when your API responds with the 200, your user can go and check the schema of the response. Once again, it's going to be typed, and you're even going to have like a description to tell your user what exactly these are. For instance, the department field that the user is going to get can have one of these 4 values. So this is like a very good example of how your user can have a very easy time discovering your API just by reading through the documentation. And once again, all these were automatically generated. You did not have to write any code to actually render this whole documentation. So we are gonna go over these topics over here. I'm not gonna go over them right now. You can take a look at them, but I will put timestamps and chapters in the video, so you can go around the video if you're looking for like exactly 1 or 2 things from here. All right, so with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and delete the code here, and then we're gonna build everything from scratch. So go ahead and delete everything. I'm gonna turn off the server that's running. I'm gonna move these to the right because I will need the code open to my left, sorry. All right, so we have a blank file right now called main.py. That's where all the code is gonna be. The first thing we need to do is go ahead and import what we need. So we're gonna do from FastAPI, import FastAPI. And the other thing you need is something called uvicorn. These two are the only thing you need to get like a endpoint up and running. To run the app, all you have to do is do a if name equals main. Then you have to just do a uvicorn.run. You need to give it the host, which is gonna be 0.0.0.0. And then you give it a port. In our case, we're gonna give it 8000. And then you need to pass it something called app. We're gonna go ahead and see what this app is gonna be now. So it's gonna be very simple. For app, all you have to do is instantiate the FastAPI. We're gonna set debug to true. This is gonna emit a lot of logs that you can use. So just with this, you will have your endpoint up and running. Let's go ahead and create our first very basic endpoint. So all you have to do is do a app.get, and then the name, we're gonna call it status. And then for the function, we're gonna do async def, and then just the name of the function, we're gonna call it check status. And then let's just return hello world. All right, so this should be enough for you to get the documentation and get your API up and running. So let's go ahead and run this. So we're gonna do a python3.main.py. So let's say run takes 1 positional argument, but 2 were given, right? So you have to actually name them. So this is gonna be host. That should do it. All right, so you can see it's running locally at 8000. So let's actually go there, right? So I'm gonna open a new Safari window, move it over to the left. So let's just do a local host. Let's just do a 127. Yeah, that's better. And then remember our endpoint was called status. And you're seeing we're getting the hello world over here. If we do it through Insomnia, let's go to status, sent. You see we're getting hello world. So we have this up and running. Now let's see how you can look at the documentation. All you need to do is go to 127.0.0.1.8,000 and do a /docs. And you can see we have our first documentation for the status endpoint, and we didn't really give it any input or output, so it's very bare bones, but we're gonna see how to build on top of it. All right, so now that we have our first endpoint running, let's go ahead and build on top of it. Okay, so the first more complicated endpoint we're gonna have is gonna be called employees. And then this is gonna take in, I'm not sure if I spelled it right. Yeah, this is gonna take in a path parameter called employee ID. That's the first thing. This is how you tell FastAPI that your path, the URL has a path parameter. Okay, that's all you need. And then let's go ahead and define the function. We're gonna call it, let's say, get employees. Okay. And this is where you go ahead and ingest the path parameter. So the name has to be the same. So you have employee ID and employee ID, and then you give it the type, which is going to be integer in our case. And that's all you need. And let's just return some mock data to just give you an example. So let's say we're just going to return like a list of objects, ID 1. Let's give it like a name of Bob. Let's give it another object. So let's give it ID 2, and let's give it a name of maybe Mike. All right, so this is all you need. We're gonna test out how the path parameter works, right? And let's print out the employee ID. Okay, perfect. We're gonna close it and then open it again. You can see it's running. Let's go to our docs. And you see we have our next endpoint, which is get employees. If we expand it, you see we have employee ID as a parameter. It's required, and it's a path parameter. So a very cool thing you can do is you can test your endpoint right from here. So if you go to try it out over here and click it, it lets you input the path parameter. We're gonna put 10 and hit execute. And you see we get a 200 response with the list that we're returning from the backend. If we go to the editor, you see we got the request and then it printed out 10, which is what we passed in. Let's try a different employee ID. Let's try 100. Execute. And you see we're getting 100. So you don't even need like a Postman or an Insomnia. You can do your whole testing from here, which is very convenient. All right, so that's how you create a path parameter and parse it in your backend. Next thing we're gonna take a look at is query parameter. Okay, so for query parameter, let's say over here, we're gonna take in a query parameter called gender. All you have to do is do gender and then a string. So the way FastAPI is gonna differentiate between path parameter and query parameters is by the name. So if you have employee ID here, it's gonna match to a path parameter over here. That's how FastAPI knows that this is the path parameter. Anything else over here must be a query parameter. So it's gonna go ahead and parse it as a query parameter. So let's just print the gender here too to give you an idea. We're gonna shut down our API once again and create it here. Let's go over here, refresh it. Okay. And now you can see we have employee ID, which is a path parameter, and we have gender, which is a query parameter. Let's go ahead and try it out. We're gonna give it like 50, and gender, let's give it male. Execute. We get the response from the backend. Let's go ahead and take a look at our backend. You see we're printing 50, which is the employee ID, and gender, which is male. However, you see both are required over here. Let's say you want your query parameter to be optional. All you have to do is over here where you defined gender, you give it a default value. Let's say we give it none. Right? Let's restart it. There you go. And go back to the documentation and refresh it. Now you see gender is nullable. It's not required. Let's try it out. So we're gonna give it 77 employee ID, and gender, let's leave it empty. Execute. We get the same response. If we look at the backend, you see we're printing the employee ID 77, and when printing the gender, we're printing none because we did not pass anything. Whereas before we were getting, I'm not sure we have it over here, do we? We don't have it over here, but yeah, so before we were seeing that when we were passing in male, the print statement was reading male. So very easy to differentiate between your path parameter and query parameter, and very easy to define a default value so that it's not required anymore. All right, so now let's go ahead and see how you can get even more documentation and more flexibility, right? So let's add a new department, a new query parameter, which is going to be called department. Let's not give it a type right now. We're just going to give it the default value of none. Okay. All right, let's run it. And then let's do a refresh. Okay, so now you see we have department, which is a query, but it doesn't give you the type, right? Let's say the type is gonna be as such, it can only be one of 3 or 4 values, right? We know ahead of time what are the possible values the client is allowed to send, and we're gonna get automatic validation from the API. So let's see how you wanna do that. So we're gonna go ahead and import something from, we're gonna do from Pydantic, import base model. Okay, and then we're gonna define a class called department, which is gonna be an enum. We won't be using the base model right now. It's gonna be a basic enum. We're gonna do, let's say math equals math. And then we're gonna do English equals English. And we're gonna do chemistry equals chemistry. Okay. We do need to import our enum. So we're gonna go ahead and do from enum, import enum. Okay. So these are the possible values that the user can pass in into the department query string. So let's give this a type of department. Save it. So we have employee ID, which is an int, gender, which is a string and nullable, and department, which is not nullable. And the value will have to be one of them over here. Let me see what's happening over here. Right. So we need to switch them, I believe. Okay. So we have employee ID, department, and gender. Let's go ahead and run it over here. All right, we're gonna refresh. So you have employee ID, which is required. Department, now you see we're getting this documentation. It knows that the user is only allowed to put math, English, or chemistry, depending on the enum you defined over here, just because you typed it as department. Very, very easy documentation you're getting without writing any code almost at all. So let's go ahead and try it out. We're gonna give an employee ID of, let's say 70. The department, it's gonna be one of these 3, so it doesn't even let you choose anything different. So we're gonna do English, and then let's do gender male. Before that, we're gonna go ahead and print the department here too. Okay, we're gonna restart. All right, let's run it now. We're getting a 200, let's go here. So you see we're getting 70 male and the enum department.english. Perfect. Now what if you try to put a department that is not there? So over here, the drop down lets you pick, but you can't give like an arbitrary one. So we're gonna go ahead and use Insomnia for that. So the path we're hitting is called employees. And then it has that ID, so we're gonna put 70. And then it has the query parameters, right? So we can use this over here. So for the query parameter, the first one is gonna be, let's put the gender. And we're gonna put female over here. And for the next key, it's gonna be the department, right? We're gonna use English. Let's send it. So everything works perfectly. Now, what if I put something else, like just like a random string? You see we're getting a 422, and it gives you a message that says value is not a valid enumeration, permitted math, English, and chemistry. So very good documentation and response you're getting by default without writing any code for it. All you had to do was define your query parameter as an enum and define the possible values in the enum. So this is a very good way for your user to know what's wrong with their request without needing to dig deep into the code or without you needing to write extensive documentation. All right, so we went over path parameter, query parameter, and enumeration. Now let's see what's next. Oh, and we also went through data validation because you saw how this was. Actually, let's just test another thing. Over here for gender, remember in our documentation, it knew that gender is a string. What if we try to pass it a number? It says, oh wait, so it's gonna be English. See? So if you put a number, what it's doing is it's automatically, let me just clean it up so it's easier to read. Okay, so it's automatically parsing it and converting the string, the number to the string. Make sense? So you get automatic conversions like these, which are easy to like convert from one data type to another without you needing to specifically cast it to anything else. All right, so that's pretty much data validation. The next thing we're going to take a look at is a post endpoint. So let me bring it up. There you go. All right, so now next endpoint is going to be our post endpoint. Give me 1 second. There you go. So we're going to do an app.post, and then the endpoint is going to be just employees. We're gonna do async def create employee. And now this is where it gets, actually let's do it this way. Let's just give it employee. This is how you get an request body from a post endpoint. We're gonna print the employee and then return it back. All right, so that's all you need. Let's go ahead and run it. Oops, that's the wrong window. There you go. All right, so we get the first post endpoint over here. Okay. And let's see, how do we want to do this now? So over here, right now, it thinks that it's a query parameter, right? You see over here, it thinks it's a query parameter, but of course it's not. We want it to be a request body. So all you need to do is define a complex type for this one, because of course the request body is going to be a complex type. So let's go ahead and create our first complex type. So we're going to create something called employee. We're going to inherit from base model, which we imported from Pydantic. And let's give it something. So we're going to give it an ID. We're going to give it a department. So everything is typed, we're typing everything, right? So this should be up top. Okay, perfect. All right, so we have an ID, we have a department. Let's give it an age, which is an int, and gender, which is a string. Perfect. And then for employee, we're just gonna type it over here as employee. Let's try to run it now. All right, perfect. Refresh. All right, so you see now it's the request body and it knows the type just by you adding the type over here and defining it over here. Your documentation is telling your user what it should send you as the request body. Once again, you can try it out from here. It even fills it out for you. So we're gonna go ahead and where is it? Print it. Oh, we are printing out the employee, right? Okay. So let's give it like an ID of like 80. Department math, age, let's say 25, and gender of male. Execute. We're getting a 200. We're sending the response right back. And if you look at the print statement, we are getting this ID 80, department math, age 25, gender male. So FastAPI is doing all the parsing, giving you documentation, everything. All you had to do was define a type over here. So very, very helpful. All right, let's say right now, if I refresh this, in 200, you don't really have a schema, right? So when your user wants to know what it should expect as the response, it doesn't really know what. So let's see what we can do about that, right? All right, so it's very simple. All you have to do is over here, all you have to do is give a response model. And the response model is going to be employee because we're returning it back. It can be anything. As long as you define a type over here, it should work. So we are just returning the employee right back. So we're going to add that. Run it. And now if you look at the response 200 and go to schema, it gives you the schema that the user can take a look at and know what it's getting. For department, it even tells you what's the possible values, all these for free, right? And it's also telling you that all these fields are required. Let's say we make one of them optional. So for gender, you can do equals none. Now what happens? I'm gonna refresh it. So now you see that for schema, ID, department, and age are required with the asterisk over here, but gender is optional. So you're getting all these documentation, which is going to be very, very easy for you to navigate when you have a very extensive API. All right, so this is how you can type your response from the endpoint so that your users can see what to expect from the response. All right, so what else? Let's check. So we went over simple get and post endpoints. We went over data validations, path parameter, query parameter, and request body. So the next thing for us is gonna be how you can return a status code, right? That's also a very easy thing to do once again. So let's say whenever someone hits your create endpoint, you wanna return a 201, not a 200. Okay, so the first thing you do is from FastAPI, you import something called status. And then over here, after response model, all you have to do is do a status code equals, you do status dot HTTP 201 created. So if you take a look at this over here, the documentation, right now it says 200 and then 432, right? And if did we try it out here? No. So let's try it out before our change. So we're gonna give it like some random values. Female. Okay. So remember, you were getting a 200 and the response. Now we're telling our API that return 201 instead of 200. Let's rerun it. And then go ahead and execute it again. Over here, you can see we're getting a 201, exactly the same response, but you're getting the status code that you said that you would be sending just by defining it over here. So you can explicitly set a status code right there. All right, so similar to status code, let's say you want to throw an error, right? How do you do that? All right, let's take a look at that. So over here, we import something called HTTP exception from FastAPI. And let's say in the create employee endpoint, what you want to say is if employee.id equal in 200, 300, or 400, that's when you want to raise. Let me go ahead and find that just to be sure I get this right. Yeah, so you want to raise a HTTP exception, and then you want to give it a status code of, let's say, 400, and you give it some helpful text, not a valid employee ID. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and run it again. Go to our documentation, do a refresh. Now we're gonna try it out. We're gonna try 55. Let's just do age of like 20, and then gender, let's try male this time. All right, so perfect, it's working, right? But remember, we have, if the ID is 200, 300, or 400, we should return status code of 400 with a helpful message over here. So let's pass it ID 200. All right, so you're seeing our response is a 400, and in the response body, you get attribute detail, which tells you not a valid employee ID. So this is how you explicitly raise an exception. You could have done this as like 502 if you wanted to, and then let's give it to server does not recognize the ID. And then if you execute it, you're getting a 500, and then you're getting a message over here. So that's how you can give helpful status codes and detailed messages when throwing an exception, so that your user knows exactly what went wrong in the request. All right, so we went over status codes and HTTP exceptions. So the next thing is gonna be, we're gonna take a look at cookies and request headers, how you can read them. All right, so let's see which endpoint. Let's just create a new endpoint now. Okay, so we're gonna create another post endpoint. We're gonna call it send email. All right, so we're gonna create our function. So the function is gonna take in, let's say, a token. So this is gonna be coming in, so we need to import some stuff. So we're gonna import from typing, import optional. And then from FastAPI, we're gonna import something called cookie, and then something called header. All right, so the first thing is gonna be a token. We're gonna expect a token to be coming from the request. So all you have to do is give it the type of cookie and default to none. So you're saying that there should be a cookie called token. And let's say we have a user agent, and this is gonna be a request header. So you're gonna give it header and none. All right. And then let's say that you are getting a payload because it's post request, right? We're gonna get like a notification payload, and we're gonna type it to something called notification payload. Let's define the type over here. So let's just do it right over here. So let's say we're gonna do notification type. We're gonna inherit from base model once again. And let's just keep it simple, the type I mean. So we're just gonna give it like email, which is gonna be a string, and then notification type, which is gonna be an int. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure we got this right. There you go. Okay, so we expect a payload called notification payload of the notification type. Is that what I called it? Yeah, notification type. And then we expect a token, which is gonna be optional. and it's gonna be in your cookie, and a user agent, which is gonna be in your header. And let's just return everything right back to make it clear. So we're gonna have cookie received, which is gonna be the token. And then we're gonna have user agent received, and this is gonna be the user agent. I forgot the commas over here. There you go. So cookie, and then I'll just put like a custom message. I parsed everything. All right. So essentially we are taking in, and let's print out everything. So let's print our notification payload. Let's print the token, and let's print the user agent. All right, so we're taking in, we have a send email post endpoint, which takes in notification payload as a request body. And the type of notification payload is gonna be this, which is an email, which is a string, and notification type, which is an int. And then it is gonna parse the cookie, the request cookies, and then get the token. It's gonna be a cookie called token, and user agent, which is gonna be in the request header. So instead of, okay, let's do this. I'm gonna run it. So over here, we have the send email now. And you see we have something called user agent, which is a header, and token, which is a cookie. You can put it from here, but we're gonna do it through Insomnia so you can see how it actually works. And you see the request body is also typed over here. All right, let's see, we go to Insomnia. So now our endpoint is called send email. All right, so we're gonna call it send email. We don't need any query parameters anymore. Okay, we need a request body, which is gonna be JSON. And remember, let's go through our documentation. The request body needs to have an email, which is a string, and notification type, which is an int. So we're gonna give it an email called test@test.com, and we're gonna give it what's that called? What was it? Notification type, which is gonna be 1. All right, that's all we're gonna do. And the next thing is our cookie. So if we go to cookies over here, you can see that our domain 127.0.0.1, which is a local domain, has a cookie called token set to 123.432. It also has another cookie called ads ID, which is set to this. So we're gonna check one at a time. All right, so let's see. And the user agent should be implicit from the request, because every time you send a request to your backend, if it's from a browser, the user agent is gonna be your browser. If it's from Insomnia, it has its own user agent. So we're gonna take a look at that. All right, so let's go ahead and print. We have our print going, right? Okay, let's call the endpoint now. Method not allowed. Oh, it's gonna be a post. Perfect. Send. All right, so you're seeing we're getting cookie received 123.432, which is exactly this one. So it is parsing it correctly. The user agent it received is Insomnia 2021, because we sent our request from Insomnia, and we're getting our custom message. If we take a look over here, you see our backend got everything correctly. So remember the other cookie we had, which was called ads ID, and this was the value. Let's say we want to include that. All you have to do is after token, let's add a new one called ads ID. You want to keep the name consistent. This is going to be optional too, and this is going to be a cookie too. Perfect. And then we're going to give a comma, and let's return it back of course. So let's say ads ID received, and it's going to be ads ID. Let's also print it out. And I missed a comma over here. There you go. We are gonna run it again. And then go ahead and send the request. Now you see we're getting ads ID received, which is 231DF, which is exactly this one. That's how you parse a cookie and request header very easily, just by defining the parameters as a cookie or header, whichever one it is. And you don't really have to worry about like complicated functions to extract the cookie or the user agent. It's automatically done for you, which is very, very cool. All right, so I think we have like 2 more things to go over. So let's finish it off. The first thing is even better documentation. So right now in the employee base model, you see we have just defined the types. We did not define like a very helpful string, right? So let's say what you want is in your documentation. Let's look at get employees. So right now, if you take a look at your response, which was it post? Yeah, so the post endpoint over here. In the response, if you look at the code at first, you're seeing that the response is gonna be an employee object. And that's why in the schema of the response, you got this beautiful documentation. Let's say you wanted it to be more helpful, right? You wanted to actually tell the user what does an ID mean, what does a department mean, what's an age, or what's gender. So all you have to do is you import from Pydantic, you import something called field. Okay. And then you go ahead and do a equals field, and then you give it a description. Let's say the ID that the employee uses to log in everywhere. Okay, we're gonna copy this, and then for department, let's do the same thing. Let's give it the primary department of the employee. Similarly, for age, let's just say the official age of the employee. And for gender, okay, so this is a cool one, right? For gender, we right now have a default of none. So what you could do is you could have the field and then default equals none, and then description equals the gender of the employee if they want to disclose it. All right, perfect. Now let's go ahead and reset this. Do a refresh. Now you see if we go to schema and employee, you get the description that you wrote, which makes it very, very helpful to know how to use your API. All you had to do was implement the field where you can pass a description, and if you want, a default value too. And you can see we only mentioned default for gender. That's why gender is optional. It can be none. And for employee and department and age, it's an actual asterisk. For in the request body, it's the same thing, right? Because if we take a look at our post endpoint, our request body was supposed to be an employee object too. So in request body, if you go to schema, you get the exact same documentation, which is very handy. I just showed you like a very basic form of documentation. You can even do things like, I don't know, so let's see. You could essentially do, let's say the gender needs to be max length of, let's do like 8, right? So at most your gender can be a string of 8 characters. Let's see if this works. I haven't tried it. We're gonna refresh it. So let's say, so the request body schema. So for gender, it says max length equals 8. Okay, let's try it out to see if the validation works. Or do you have to do something extra? So ID is gonna be, let's say 10. Age is gonna be, let's say 30. Gender at first, let's put male. This is working. We're getting a 201 back. Let's do female. That's working too. We're getting it back. Now let's try like a very big one. Okay, that's more than 8 characters. Remember, we are defining this to be 8 max. If we do execute, we are getting an error 422, and it says that in the request body gender attribute, ensure this value has at most 8 characters. So just by adding the property over here, you are getting that validation. You can do all sorts of things. Over here you can have max digits. If it's an array, you can have max items. I would encourage you to take a look at the documentation to see how you can use all the different fields. All right, so all these you're getting just by defining the type here, and you are getting it for the request body as well as the response body, which is amazing. All right, finally, we're gonna take a look at background tasks and then cross-origin requests. So let's say your send email endpoint actually kicks off an email to be sent to the user. But of course, you wanna send the email in the background asynchronously rather than blocking your request until the email is sent out, because that's not good practice, right? So what we're gonna do is define a function over here. This is gonna be just called send notification, and let's say it takes in a email string. We don't have an import, so we're gonna sleep for 10 seconds and then print out the done sending email to, and then the email. So we're gonna simulate email sent by sleeping for 10 seconds. However, we wanna do this asynchronously, right? Because we don't want the request to come in and then we wait 10 seconds and then send a response back. That's not very good behavior, right? So we wanna get the request, give them a successful response, and process it in the background. So we're gonna essentially sleep for 10 seconds and then go ahead and print this out. All right, so over here in send email, let's go ahead and see how you wanna support background tasks. The first thing you need is from FastAPI, you wanna import background tasks. That's the first thing. And then in the function, in the endpoint that is actually gonna trigger the background tasks, you define background tasks and then give it the type of background tasks. Just when FastAPI sees this is of type background task, it knows that it should not include it in the documentation, or it should not expect it in the request body or parameter or query or anything else. All right, so now what we're gonna do is over here, we're gonna do background tasks dot add task. We're gonna give it the function that it's gonna kick off. In our case, it's called send notification. You can see over here. So we're gonna pass in the function. And then we're gonna pass in the payload. Right now it expects the email. So we're gonna do what is called notification payload.email. Yes, so that's all you need. And then we are gonna return this one. Okay, so let's go ahead and try running it. We're gonna try it from Insomnia, so let's do a test 2. Okay, so we're gonna do this. So what do we expect? We expect to get a response immediately while this is processing in the background. This is essentially gonna sleep for 10 seconds and then return to us this print statement. Let's do a send. Okay, so we got the 200 immediately in 2.25 milliseconds. Let's wait 10 seconds and see if we get the print statement. All right, there you go. We are getting the print statement that says done sending email to test2@test.com. Okay, let's decrease this to like 4 seconds because we're gonna spam it now. Let's run it and let's spam a few requests, right? So we're gonna do test1@test.com. We get successful, test 2, successful, test 3, successful, test 4, successful, test 5, successful. So you see, we do 4, 5, because we're sleeping and then doing it in the background. So you're seeing that delay of 4 seconds while it's sleeping. And meanwhile, the request is returning to you immediately. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and try it out again to give you a better idea. So test5 at test.com, send, test6, send, test7, send. So you see we're getting done sending email to test6 and then test7. The reason we're getting the response back immediately is because the other process is being done in the background. So we're not blocking the main thread, which is listening for the request. Because in Flask or something else, without more code that you have to write, it's very difficult to support this background task. So this is a very easy way you can kick off any background task. Right now we are simulating by sleeping for 4 seconds, but in reality, this is going to be an API call or something, which is actually taking all the time. All right, so the last thing is going to be how to support cross-origin requests. And the way you do that is going to be through a middleware. So let's go ahead and import what we need. Okay, so you do from fastapi.middleware.course import course middleware. Okay, and then what you need is you need to define a set of origin that you are gonna support. Okay, so we're gonna do it right here. Okay, so let's say the origins we wanna allow is gonna be our localhost 5000. This is the only origin that we're gonna allow course for. Okay, and then we're gonna do let's just do over here. So all we need to do is app.add middleware. You give it the middleware, which is gonna be our course middleware, and then you give it a few functions. So we do allow origin, we give it our list, and then we give allow credentials equals true. These are depending on your use case, you either give them or not. Allow methods, we wanna allow all the methods. So for that, you need to just put star. So that means get, post, whatever it is, let them send a request across domain. Allow headers, same, give star. All right, so that's pretty much all you need. So now any request coming from localhost 5000 should be allowed to bypass course. Otherwise, it's gonna give you a cross-origin error. Oops, allow, did I spell it wrong? Yes, I did. Allow credentials. Okay, should be better. All right, so let's try. I think it's gonna be hard to demo this, but we're gonna give it a go. So this should work, right? Yes. So the problem is when the request is coming from the backend, it works easily because you don't have to worry about like cross-origin requests. But this is the problem you're gonna run into is when you are hosting your front end and backend separately, and then your front end sends a request to your backend. That's when you need your origin to be defined. Otherwise, you're not gonna get it. So one thing we can try doing, I'm not sure if this is gonna work, but from our browser, we can make a request to our 127, this one, and then we're gonna send it to check status, but that's a get endpoint, so that won't work. Yep, so this is gonna be difficult to demo, so you will have to take my word for it. But essentially what you wanna do is whatever origin your front end is running in, and you wanna allow it to send cross-origin request, you wanna define it over here. Let's say you have a React app, which is usually hosted in localhost 5000. As long as you define it over here, your request should come through easily. If you wanna allow cross-origin request from any origin, all you need to do is do a star. this will tell your backend that no matter what origin my request is coming from, allow it. But that's not a good security practice. Usually you wanna whitelist your host, and that's why I had localhost to begin with. All right, so that's how you support CORS. All you have to do is add the middleware here, and then give it the origin. And then if you only want like get or and post, you can like just do like post and then maybe options or whatever. Oops, so you can do like something like option. That works too, but typical use case and pretty much the only one I use is this, which whitelists my local front end and allows all methods to be coming in here without running into CORS. All right, so that is pretty much all. So let me see what we went through over here. I'm gonna copy paste our initial content points. There you go. So we went over a simple endpoint. I showed you how to do a simple get status endpoint, check status. We went ahead and saw automatic documentation being created, something like this. And all you had to do was define some types over here. You got very granular control over individual fields and very good documentation. For instance, your gender field, you gave it a description, a default, and max length. And over here in documentation, you saw all of it was kind of reflected. So you get the description, and you also get like the restrictions that you were setting. All right, so we went over that. We saw some automatic data validation. We looked into query parameters, how you can make them required and optional. We also looked at path parameters and request body. For our request body or path parameters, we saw how you can enumerate it. So for instance, for department, we only were allowing math, English, and chemistry. And in the documentation, you saw how it was automatically coming through. And if you supplied a department that was outside this list, it was automatically getting an error with a good message. After that, we looked into a post endpoint with a request body and how it was doing the parsing and converting for you. At the same time, you had good documentation to show you what was going to be the expected response. We also looked at browser cookies and headers and how you can read them very easily. All you had to do was, where is that one? All you had to do was define them as a cookie type or a header type, and it was being automatically parsed in your backend. So that was very simple to do. We looked at typed response, which is just another very cool way to let your users know how to use your API. We went ahead and saw how you can implement explicit status codes so that your user does not get the generic 200 and 400 all the time. You can have custom status codes for different endpoints. Similarly, we saw how you can throw HTTP errors with like a very helpful message. So the example for that was over here. You were explicitly returning a 500 and giving it a message so that your user knows what to expect. Finally, we took a look at background tasks and how you can kick them off without blocking on the request. So you can essentially take in a request, kick something off in the background to be worked on asynchronously, and give a response back immediately while in the background your thing is being processed. Lastly, we took a look at cross-origin requests and how you can enable CORS for a few origins only. Where is that one? Where is the origins? There you go. So yeah, you could either whitelist a few origins that you're gonna allow cross-domain requests from, or you could do something like I did before where you just do like a star. This is gonna let all origin requests to come through without running into any CORS issue. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. Personally, I find FastAPI to be super quick and it gives me the documentation. So initially it might not look like much, but when you have an extensive API with a lot of endpoints, it really comes handy not only for the users, but also yourself when you're developing, because it's very easy to forget what type should go where. And especially Python being an untyped language, it makes it very difficult to maintain. So I find this personally to be a very helpful and easy way to write APIs very quickly. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below and I'll get to you as soon as I can. I'm also going to link all the resources like the documentation and the code that I wrote over here in the description. So take a look at that if you're interested. With that being said, thanks for watching the whole video and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.